For your ears only, I'm David Alpern, back with Warren Levinson of AP and more coverage of the 9/11 terror attack from our September 16th, 2001 Newsweek On Air broadcast.
I don't know what's happening to her. She left for work, and that's the last I've seen of her. I just want her to come home.
All I can do is pray that she comes out of this and that I can hold her.
Lilith Bourbon and David Vincent searching for relatives at the smoking, jutting, twisted remains of the World Trade Center. They themselves are also victims, of course, as is a whole country that suddenly feels both shocking loss and unprecedented vulnerability. To talk more about security and psychology in the aftermath of last week's terror attack, we have Newsweek's senior editor Sharon Begley, our science editor, and Dr. Peter Stavinoha, neuropsychologist at Children's Medical Center in Dallas.
But first, more of your views in the new Newsweek poll. Only 36% say they don't feel at all less safe than before. 12% say a lot less, 24% somewhat, 27% a little less safe. 43% see more terrorist attacks very likely. Only 15% strongly favor more government monitoring of private calls and emails.
Now to Sharon Begley. Sharon, beyond the restrictions at the airports that have already been announced, what new security measures do your sources see as most likely in the near future?
Well, the first round of them clearly has to do with the security breaches that are so apparent at airports. Time and again, when federal agents have run tests, they have been able to, for instance, slip past security with weapons. They've been able to get out onto the tarmac and have unrestricted access to airplanes and have put on to the planes fake pipe bombs. They've been able to follow documented bona fide workers through doors that require card access simply by piggybacking on the person who has opened it. Ground workers, caterers, custodians are subject to virtually no background or criminal checks, certainly no fingerprinting. A lot of the things that we have taken for granted in a free and open society are clearly going to change.
And what about for those of us who don't really intend to go to an airport anytime soon? What can we expect to see around workplaces, neighborhoods, public spaces?
Well, this, of course, speaks to the point that America excels at fighting the last war, and to think that by securing our airports we're going to prevent any further terrorism is clearly naive. People are talking about closing off airspace above sports stadiums. Border checks are going to become a lot more rigorous. After the Oklahoma City bombings and those at the American embassies in Africa, a lot more stringent policies were put into place simply for access to public buildings. Biometric checks of retinas, fingerprints, all parcels being opened. Even things like the concrete barriers and flower pots that are now standard landscaping in front of many buildings after the Oklahoma City bombings. I think you'll see a lot more surveillance cameras. There's a technology that allows cameras to scan a crowd and to match any face to 1 million in a database in less than a second. There's, of course, huge concerns about the privacy infiltration that imposes. But again, I think at least in the immediate aftermath of these attacks, Americans are probably going to stomach a lot more than they would have a week ago.
And what are psychologists saying about the psychic cost of all this?
Well, there are, of course, individual psychological tolls. People tell me that many will be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, but as a collective sort of psychological angst that the country is going through, as you noted at the top, America has basically gone through its 200-plus years of existence feeling pretty much impregnable and vulnerable thanks to two huge oceans on either side of us. Americans are not used to feeling like victims, certainly not helpless victims. The sense that we have been attacked so horribly and, at least so far, have not been able to clearly and unambiguously identify who did it, much less get back at them, is a real blow to the American psyche, which, this feeling of being protected, of being secure within our borders, certainly in our heartland, has a lot to do with the American mind, with creativity, with entrepreneurial zest. All the things that we think of as quintessentially American derive in large part from our feeling of security, and that's gone.
Senior editor Sharon Begley. Next to Dr. Peter Stavinoha of Children's Medical Center in Dallas. Doctor, you say that more important than what people say to their kids now is how well they listen to them. What should they be listening for?
What they need to be listening for are signs of anxiety, and so it may be in older kids things that they're saying, things that they're trying to discuss about, trying to understand this, trying to understand who did it, why did it happen. In younger children, they really need to be more watching for signs of anxiety. So it might be kids who are regressing a little bit into some old patterns of anxiety. They don't want to sleep alone. They want to, not go to bed. They don't want to separate from parents. kind of typical signs that kids are really struggling and feeling insecure and somewhat out of control.
And what do you do with a kid who regresses?
Number one is to reassure them. What parents need to be doing is being calm themselves, because you sure don't want to communicate a sense to your child that I'm out of control or that I'm highly anxious. I think that there are ways to discuss the recent disasters in such a way as to let kids know that things are stable, things are secure. And so you try to stick to a pretty predictable routine. You try to go through the motions and keep life as typical as possible, because kids really do find a lot of security in what is consistent and familiar to them.
I heard a mother recently complaining or worrying that her little boy, having seen the crash of the plane on television, kept crashing his toy plane into a play building over and over. She was really worried about this, but experts said that it was his way, a normal way of regaining control in a way of what he'd witnessed.
Exactly. What that does is for a child that puts the control back in their hands. And so now this occurrence that he's watching happen over and over and over, he's in control of that occurrence. And so now the outcome is dependent on him. And so that's no different than a little boy or a little girl who plays a superhero, and they work miracles as a superhero, putting things back in control for them so that it gives them that sense of security.
Should we be regulating how much the kids see and read about this?
Absolutely. I think that particularly for younger kids, they really don't need to know a lot about this. I think that they're going to stumble upon some information. Peers are going to be telling them things, and so parents may find themselves having to fill in gaps, and they certainly don't want their kids going on rumors and speculation, so they're going to have to correct some factual information for them. With older kids, I also think it's a good idea to limit access to some extent, but clearly these kids have the means of reading the paper, watching television. You just don't want them to be consumed by it. And so I would recommend that parents keep an eye on what their kids know and try to enter into discussion and use this as an opportunity to talk about the family's values and what the family's kind of collective response is to the disasters.
And how do parents explain to older kids anyway the evil of the act as well as the pain and the loss, then deal with their own kids' anger or fear?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as adults we're struggling with the very same issues, and I think that there's, I think as adults we can acknowledge that to our kids, but at the same time we also have to reestablish that there is a line of trust here. And so while this kind of thing does occur and you can kind of put it into your family's value system in terms of political values or faith-based values in terms of trying to discuss the evil involved, but then eventually there needs to be some line of trust where it's kids trusting parents to maintain safety, it's parents trusting the government or parents trusting God or whomever, but at some point there needs to be this sense of security so that we're not all walking around just wondering what's going to happen next.
Dr. Peter Stavinoha is a neuropsychologist at Children's Medical Center in Dallas. We also spoke with Newsweek senior editor Sharon Begley in New York.
Here's another quote. "He was my angel," Norma Hessick, who worked her way down from the 82nd floor Trade Center office after the first plane hit. She was cowering in the corner of a nearby hotel when a man said, "Lady, take my hand," and led her to a local hospital.
From our September 16th, 2001 Newsweek on Air broadcast. Now a quote from last week's news. "Can we talk or grow up?" Those are two trademark lines for sharp-tongued, trend-setting, frequently facelifted comedian, actress, author, and producer Joan Rivers in more than 50 years of politically incorrect cracks about celebrities, tragedies, and herself. She died last week at age 81 after outpatient surgery on her vocal cords went awry. Next from our original 9/11 coverage, Islam and intelligence, for your ears only.